Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the autumn of 1949, the dense forests of the Ozark Mountains harbored a secret that would remain buried for decades. What began as a simple investigation into an abandoned cabin near the remote town of Van Buren, Missouri, would unravel into something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The events that transpired there would haunt the region for generations, spoken of only in whispers among locals who still refused to venture into that particular valley after sunset. The case first came to light when Ranger Emmett Caldwell discovered a weather-beaten journal during a routine patrol of the Mark Twain National Forest. The journal belonged to Dr. Vincent Hargrove, a respected physician from Springfield who had vanished without a trace nearly 8 months prior. What made this discovery particularly disturbing was the location. A dilapidated cabin situated deep in a valley that didn't appear on any official maps of the area. The coordinates, meticulously recorded in the journal's opening pages, led to a section of forest that locals had long avoided. A place whispered about in hushed tones at Van Buren's only tavern. The Hargrove case was initially treated as a simple disappearance. A 53-year-old physician with an impeccable reputation, Dr. Hargrove had told colleagues he needed time away to recover from exhaustion following his service as an Army doctor during the war. His practice had been suffering. Patients reported his hands would sometimes shake uncontrollably during examinations, and he had been seen staring vacantly into space mid-conversation. No one questioned his departure, seeing it as necessary recovery from the psychological wounds of wartime medicine. It wasn't until his sister, Josephine Reed, received a peculiar letter, postmarked from Van Buren, that concerns began to mount. "I found something in these woods that defies explanation," he wrote in handwriting, that Mrs. Reed later described as barely recognizable as her brother's normally precise script. "Something in the structure of this place isn't right. The angles, they shouldn't be possible. I measure them daily now and they change, Josephine. The room expands and contracts like it's breathing." The letter contained coordinates to a location deep in the forest and an urgent plea. "If I don't return by spring, don't send anyone after me. Seal this place instead." When Mrs. Reed attempted to contact authorities, the letter was dismissed as the ramblings of a man seeking solitude or suffering from war-related stress. 3 months passed before anyone took her concerns seriously, and by then the trail had gone cold. What we know about the cabin comes primarily from the meticulous notes found in Dr. Hargrove's journal and the subsequent investigation led by Missouri State Police Detective Marshall Thorne in early 1950. The cabin itself was unusual, constructed sometime in the early 1930s by a man known locally only as Gideon. County records from Ripley County revealed little about this individual except that he had purchased 80 acres of densely forested land in 1928 and was rarely seen in the nearest town of Van Buren. According to the bartender at the Riverfront Tavern, Gideon would appear every few months to purchase supplies, speaking little and always departing before sunset. The last anyone had seen of him was the summer of 1947, when he reportedly told the general store owner that the house was getting crowded despite living alone. The region was known for its isolation. Deep valleys surrounded by limestone ridges created natural barriers between settlements. The current river snaked through the terrain, often flooding during the spring rains and making roads impassable for weeks at a time. The nearest neighbor to the cabin was over 7 miles away, an elderly trapper named Morris Holloway, who reported having met Gideon only twice in 15 years. It was precisely this isolation that attracted Dr. Hargrove to the area His journal's early entries describe his need for quiet after witnessing the horrors of war medicine. "The silence of these woods speaks to me," he wrote in January 1949. "Here, miles from the nearest neighbor, I can finally sleep without hearing the screams of young men dying on operating tables. The cabin is primitive but sufficient. A stone fireplace, hand-hewn furniture, and a root cellar stocked with preserved goods. Gideon, whoever he was, prepared this place as if for a long siege. There are shelves of canned vegetables dated as recently as 1947, though locals say he vanished that same year. I wonder what became of him." What began as a retreat for healing would transform into something much darker, documented in increasingly frantic journal entries. The cabin itself was a modest structure, a single-story building constructed of local oak and limestone with 2 rooms and a root cellar. What made it unusual, according to Detective Thorne's report, was its placement. Built directly into the side of a limestone ridge, half of the cabin was essentially a cave. The natural rock formation created the back wall and part of the ceiling, while the front portion was conventional construction. The integration of natural cave and human construction created unusual acoustics, noted Thorne in his official report. Sound behaved strangely. Whispers from the back of the cave portion could be heard clearly at the front door, while loud noises made near the entrance seemed to disappear entirely. Standing in certain positions created the unsettling impression of hearing one's own heartbeat echo from the stone walls. Dr. Hargrove's early journal entries describe peaceful days spent hiking, cataloging local plant species, and recovering his mental health. He noted the abundant wildlife, deer that would approach to within yards of the cabin, owls that nested in the surrounding trees, and the occasional black bear that would investigate his garbage pile before lumbering back into the forest. By February, however, the tone of his writing changes dramatically. References to wildlife cease entirely. Instead, he begins to describe acoustic anomalies and strange disturbances in the air inside the cabin, particularly at night. "The darkness here has a weight to it that I've never experienced," he wrote on February 12th. "It presses against the windows like something alive, wanting entry. I've begun leaving the lantern burning through the night. The flame behaves oddly sometimes, bending toward the back wall of the cabin as if drawn by a current of air, though I can feel no draft. Last night, I woke to find the flame perfectly horizontal, pointing like an accusing finger toward the place where the wooden floor meets the cave wall. I sat watching it for an hour before it gradually returned to normal." The following week, Hargrove noted another disturbing development. "The animals have gone, not a single bird song in 3 days. Even the insects have fallen silent. The forest feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something. When I place my hand against the limestone wall, I can feel vibrations, subtle but distinct, like machinery operating deep within the earth." By March, Hargrove had become obsessed with the peculiar acoustics of the cabin. His entries detail elaborate experiments using various objects to create sounds within different parts of the structure. He fashioned crude measuring devices from string and wood to document what he described as sound shadows, areas where certain frequencies seemed to disappear completely. He described certain tones that, when produced in specific locations, seemed to open something within the cave wall, though what exactly was opening remains unclear from his writings. "When I strike the tuning fork at precisely middle C and place it against the north corner where the limestone meets the wooden frame, I can feel a vibration through the entire structure," he wrote. "It's as if the cabin resonates at that frequency, becoming something like a massive musical instrument." More troubling is what follows, a distinct echo that returns nearly 10 seconds later. There is no explanation for such a delay in a space this size. The mathematics don't allow for it. The echo would have to travel more than 2 miles and return, yet the sound retains its clarity in a way that defies acoustic principles. By mid-March, Hargrove's entries show increasing paranoia. He writes of feeling observed whenever he turns his back to the cave portion of the cabin. "There is a quality to the air in here that changes," he noted on March 17th. "The pressure shifts subtly when I'm not looking directly at the back wall. I've taken to setting traps, cups filled with water placed near the edge of where the wooden floor meets the stone. This morning, 3 were overturned, yet I heard nothing in the night." The most disturbing aspect of Hargrove's account begins in late March when he describes hearing voices emerging from the stone walls. At first, he attributed these to fatigue or his imagination. Soon, however, he began documenting them with clinical precision, the physician in him attempting to maintain scientific objectivity even as his notes betray growing terror. "The voices are faint but distinct," he wrote on March 30th. "They speak in whispers, sometimes in languages I don't recognize. When they speak English, the cadence is wrong, emphasizing syllables that should be subtle, rushing through words that should be emphasized. It's as if whoever or whatever is speaking has learned our language but doesn't understand its rhythm. Most often they simply repeat things I've said earlier in the day, but occasionally they speak new phrases. Yesterday, while boiling water for coffee, I distinctly heard 'Come closer to the wall, doctor,' emerge from the stone itself." Detective Thorne's investigation uncovered local legends about the land where the cabin stood. Old-timers in Van Buren spoke of early settlers avoiding that particular valley. According to stories documented by a WPA folklore project in 1936, indigenous peoples had considered the area a place where the world was thin. Early European trappers reported voices on the wind and strange lights in that section of forest. An 1887 account from a local newspaper described a hunting party that had stumbled upon a curious depression in the earth shaped like a perfect circle in that vicinity. The hunters reported feeling overcome with inexplicable dread and abandoned their hunt to return to town. What makes this case particularly unsettling is that Dr. Hargrove was not a man prone to superstition or flights of fancy. His medical colleagues described him as methodical, rational, and skeptical of anything that couldn't be empirically verified. He had authored papers on battlefield trauma and psychological recovery that were praised for their clear-headed analysis. Yet his journal shows a man increasingly convinced that something beyond natural explanation was occurring within the cabin. By April, Hargrove had begun spending his days outside the cabin, returning only when necessary. "I've taken to sleeping on a cot by the river," he wrote. "The cabin has become untenable at night. The whispers grow louder after sunset, and there's a sensation of being observed from every angle. More troubling are the shadows. They move independently of any light source, flowing across the walls like water. Last night I observed a dark mass gathering in the corner where the tuning fork produces that strange resonance. It remained for nearly an hour, a deeper darkness against the shadows, before dissipating when I approached with the lantern. I'm not a superstitious man, but I find myself drawing symbols of protection on the doorframe with chalk, remnants of folk magic my grandmother practiced. I know it's irrational, yet I sleep better for having done it." The journal entry dated April 17th contains a detailed drawing of the cabin's interior with specific measurements and angles noted. Hargrove wrote, "I've confirmed my suspicion today with careful measurement. The interior angles of this structure are mathematically impossible. The southeast corner measures 97 degrees, the northeast 83, the northwest 95, and the southwest 92. A four-sided structure with angles totaling 367 degrees cannot exist in Euclidean geometry, yet I am sitting within exactly such an impossible space. More troubling still, when I measure again hours later, the angles have shifted by several degrees. The cabin is not static, it's changing, reconfiguring itself in subtle ways." Hargrove's entry from April 20th describes another disturbing development. I've discovered something about the root cellar that I hadn't noticed before. The stairs descend exactly 13 steps, yet when I climb back up, there are only 12. I've tested this repeatedly today, counting carefully both ways. 13 down, 12 up. It's as if the cellar itself is consuming space, creating a dimensional discrepancy. The preserved food stored there has begun to change as well. Jars that contained beans now hold what appears to be dark liquid that moves independently when the jars are still. What happened in the cabin on the night of April 23, 1949, remains the most enigmatic aspect of the case. Hargrove's final journal entry, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, describes his plan to close whatever has been opened using a combination of sounds produced at specific points in the cabin. "I've determined that the voices are emanating from somewhere behind the stone," he wrote. "There is a space beyond. I can feel the air movement. The temperature drops significantly near the north corner, sometimes to the point where my breath fogs. I've been mapping the cold spots, and they form a distinct pattern across the floor and wall, not random at all, but a deliberate geometry that reminds me of the anatomical diagrams of the inner ear. I believe sound is the key. What was opened through acoustic resonance might be sealed the same way. Tonight, I will attempt to seal it permanently using the same acoustic principles that caused its opening. I've fashioned a crude violin from materials in the cabin and calculated the precise tones needed if I am not successful. I've left letters with instructions in my coat pocket. God help me, the whispering has gotten louder while I write this. They know what I'm planning. Lee, no letters were ever found. When Detective Thorne located the cabin in January 1950, there was no sign of Dr. Hargrove or his belongings except for the journal, which was discovered wedged between two rocks near the entrance as if placed there deliberately. A thorough search of the surrounding forest yielded nothing. No clothing, no tools, no signs of violence or struggle. It was as if the doctor had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation that followed raised more questions than answers. Forensic analysis revealed no evidence of violence or struggle within the cabin. The structure itself was untouched except for a peculiar feature that multiple officers noted in their reports, a section of the limestone wall at the back of the cabin that was unusually smooth, almost polished, according to one description, forming what appeared to be an arch shape approximately 7 feet high. When photographed, this section of wall appeared blurred in all images, regardless of the camera used or the photographer's skill. Most unsettling were the acoustic tests conducted by investigators. Using recording equipment borrowed from the State University, they documented unusual patterns of sound reflection within the cabin. Sounds produced near the entrance were deadened unnaturally, while even the faintest noises made near the back wall were amplified. Most disturbing was the confirmation of Hargrove's observation about delayed echoes. Certain tones, when produced in specific locations, returned echoes several seconds later that contained subtle alterations in pitch and timbre. Local authorities, at Detective Thorne's recommendation, sealed the cabin in February 1950. The official report cited structural instability as the reason, though Thorne's personal notes, which remained sealed until 1968, suggested other concerns. Whatever drove Dr. Hargrove to disappear may still be present within those walls, Thorne wrote in his private investigative journal. The unusual geometry, unexplained acoustics, and consistent reports of unease by every officer who entered the structure suggest this location has properties that defy conventional explanation. Officer Rayburn refused to return after his first visit, claiming he heard his name being called from empty rooms. Officer Sullivan reported seeing a dark shape moving along the ceiling when no one else was present. In my 20 years of police work, I've never encountered a place that seemed inherently wrong simply by existing. Thorne's notes also detail an incident that occurred during the investigation that was omitted from official reports. While measuring the interior dimensions of the root cellar, two officers experienced simultaneous nosebleeds and disorientation. Both reported hearing a low humming sound that was not audible to other officers present. Most concerning was their insistence that the cellar stairs had changed during their descent, a straight staircase somehow becoming curved, despite no structural evidence of such a transformation. The case might have remained an obscure footnote in Ozark history if not for what occurred in 1967, when a geology expedition from Missouri State University discovered the sealed entrance to the cabin while mapping cave systems along the current river. Despite warnings from local residents, 3 graduate students broke the seals to explore the structure. What happened next is known only through a partial audio recording made by one of the students, Raymond Lewis. The first 3 minutes of the recording capture normal conversation as the students examined the cabin's construction. At approximately 3 minutes and 20 seconds, a student is heard saying, "That's strange. Look at how the shadows are moving." Another responds, "Do you hear that?" Like whispering. The recording captures their discovery of the polished arch in the limestone wall, which one student describes as warm to the touch, almost like it's alive. The remainder of the recording consists of increasingly panicked voices discussing impossible angles and something moving in the stone. One student is heard saying, "It's opening, the wall is opening," followed by the sound of rushing air. The final 30 seconds contain only static, punctuated by what audio analysts have described as non-human vocalizations, before cutting off abruptly. 2 of the students emerged from the forest 2 days later, disoriented and suffering from exposure. Neither could account for what happened inside the cabin or the whereabouts of Raymond Lewis. Despite an extensive search involving over 100 volunteers and tracking dogs, Lewis was never found. The 2 surviving students suffered significant psychological trauma and were unable to provide coherent accounts of their experience. Both exhibited similar symptoms: night terrors, sudden unexplained nosebleeds, and an intense fear of enclosed spaces. Most troubling was their shared delusion that something had followed them out of the cabin, a presence they could sense but not see. Both would later take their own lives within 5 years of the incident, one by hanging, the other by walking into the current river during winter with his pockets filled with stones. Following this tragedy, authorities from the U.S. Forest Service demolished the cabin in 1968 and sealed the cave entrance with concrete. The official explanation cited concerns about unstable limestone formations and the risk of cave-ins. The area was designated off-limits and removed from public forest maps. The Hargrove case might have ended there, buried in government archives, if not for the drought of 1986, which dramatically lowered water levels throughout the Ozarks. In August of that year, a fisherman on the current river discovered what appeared to be a doctor's medical bag wedged between rocks in a previously submerged section of the riverbed approximately 2 miles downstream from the cabin site. The bag's contents included water-damaged personal effects belonging to Dr. Vincent Hargrove, including his medical license, a pocket watch stopped at 11:17, and a sealed mason jar containing a single folded paper. The note inside, remarkably preserved, contained just one sentence: "It isn't sealed. I've only given it another door." Forensic analysis of the medical bag revealed other disturbing details not released to the public until 1995. The leather of the bag showed unusual patterns of deterioration, perfect circular holes approximately 1 centimeter in diameter that lab technicians could not attribute to any known form of decomposition or animal activity. More puzzling were the contents of several glass vials found inside, which contained what was described as viscous black fluid of unknown composition that resisted standard chemical analysis. When placed under a microscope, the fluid appeared to contain minuscule crystalline structures that rearranged themselves when observed, a phenomenon one lab technician described as like watching a living stained glass window constantly rebuilding itself. The most recent chapter in this disturbing saga occurred in 1995, when construction of a new Forest Service road unearthed limestone fragments approximately half a mile from the original cabin site. Among the fragments was a piece measuring roughly 2 feet square that caught the attention of workers due to its unusually smooth, almost polished surface. According to the crew foreman's statement, the fragment had what appeared to be words etched into its surface in an unidentified script, flowing symbols that resembled a cross between Arabic and musical notation. Before the fragment could be properly documented, it reportedly fractured into hundreds of pieces when exposed to direct sunlight. Workers described the fracturing as occurring with explosive force, sending fragments flying up to 20 feet away. One worker sustained a minor cut from a projected fragment and reported that the wound burned like acid and took nearly twice as long as expected to heal. Forest Service officials collected the remains for analysis, but the results of this examination, if any was conducted, have never been made public. What makes the Hargrove case so disturbing isn't just the disappearance of the doctor and subsequently Raymond Lewis, but the consistent pattern of inexplicable phenomena associated with the location. From indigenous avoidance of the area to the acoustic anomalies, impossible geometry, and the psychological impact on those who entered the structure. Every element suggests something beyond conventional understanding. Missouri State Archives contain Detective Thorne's complete case files, though certain documents remain sealed by request of the U.S. Forest Service. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2007 to access these sealed records was denied, citing ongoing investigation, despite the case being officially closed in 1968. Perhaps most unsettling is what happened to those who investigated the case. Detective Thorne retired early from the police force in 1951, moving to Oregon, where he reportedly refused to discuss the Hargrove investigation until his death in 1973. His widow later revealed that he would not sleep in completely dark rooms and insisted their home have no enclosed spaces with stone walls. In the months before his death, Thorne reportedly became convinced that someone was whispering to him through the heating vents in his home. Medical records indicate he was treated for severe insomnia and auditory hallucinations in his final years. The forest ranger who discovered Hargrove's journal, Emmett Caldwell, requested transfer to another district shortly after turning the journal over to authorities. In a 1962 interview for a local historical society, Caldwell explained his decision. "Some places in those woods don't feel right, like they're watching you. After finding that journal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that valley. For months after, I'd wake up thinking I heard someone calling my name from just outside the window, but when I looked, there was never anyone there. Just shadows that seemed a little too dark, a little too solid." Caldwell's interview contains another disturbing anecdote that suggests the effects of the cabin may have spread beyond those who directly encountered it. About 6 months after the Hargrove business, I started noticing strange marks appearing on the stone foundation of my house, perfect circles about the size of a dime that would appear overnight. No matter how I scrubbed them, they'd return. The dog wouldn't go near that part of the house, and plants planted along that wall would wither within days. I moved out that winter and never looked back. Sold the house at a loss to a fellow who thought I was crazy. Last I heard, he didn't stay more than a year himself. Today, the precise location of the cabin has been deliberately obscured on official maps. The coordinates contained in Hargrove's letter to his sister led to an unremarkable section of forest with no visible remnants of human habitation. Yet local guides still refuse to take hikers to that particular valley, and fishermen on the Current River report unusual acoustic phenomena in the area, sounds that echo when they shouldn't, and voices that seem to carry impossible distances over the water. In 1998, a hunting party reported finding a perfect circle of dead vegetation approximately 30 feet in diameter near the presumed cabin site. Within this circle, they discovered numerous small animal skeletons, primarily squirrels and birds, arranged in a spiral pattern that one hunter described as too deliberate to be natural. By the time forest rangers investigated the report 3 days later, no trace of the circle or the animal remains could be found. The Ozark Mountains have always harbored secrets in their ancient limestone folds. The forests that blanket those hills are among the oldest in North America, and the caves that honeycomb the region extend far deeper than any complete mapping has documented. Perhaps there are spaces where, as local legend suggests, the world grows thin, and something else presses against that membrane from the other side. What happened to Dr. Vincent Hargrove in that cabin during the spring of 1949 will likely never be fully known. His journal entries suggest a man gradually coming to terms with something that defied his medical training and rational worldview. The final pages show increasingly frantic handwriting as he documented phenomena that should not have been possible in our understanding of physics. Those who study the case today point to the curious fact that Hargrove's descriptions of acoustic anomalies, impossible geometry, and the sensation of being watched align remarkably well with theoretical physics concepts that wouldn't become mainstream until decades later. Ideas about spatial dimensions and non-Euclidean geometry that a doctor in 1949 would have had little exposure to. His reference to the cabin's angles totaling 367 degrees describes a geometric impossibility that mathematicians now associate with certain hyperbolic spaces. One particularly eerie connection emerged in 2002 when Dr. Leonard Schiff, a physicist at Washington University, came across the Hargrove Journal while researching Ozark acoustical phenomena. Schiff noted that Hargrove's descriptions of sound behaving strangely within the cabin closely resembled theoretical models of acoustic black holes, regions where the properties of space are manipulated to trap or channel sound waves in ways that defy normal physics. Such concepts weren't developed until the early 1970s, more than 2 decades after Hargrove documented similar phenomena in his crude experiments. Either Hargrove was decades ahead of theoretical physics, Schiff wrote in an obscure academic paper, or he encountered a natural phenomenon that science is only now beginning to understand. His descriptions of sound disappearing into certain regions of the cabin and returning altered match our current understanding of how acoustic event horizons might behave. The Forest Service maintains its official position that the area was sealed due to geological instability, yet every few years, rumors circulate among hikers and locals about strange sounds and distorted shadows in that section of the forest. Rangers routinely find unauthorized campers attempting to locate the site, drawn by the legend that has grown around the cabin and its vanished inhabitant. In 2009, 2 hikers who had ventured into the restricted area reported experiencing a localized temporal anomaly. Their watches stopped for a period of approximately 3 hours, though they perceived only minutes passing. Both described a sensation of thickened air and difficulty breathing in a circular clearing that matches descriptions of where the cabin once stood. More disturbing was their shared auditory hallucination. Both reported hearing what sounded like a violin playing discordant notes that seemed to come from beneath the ground. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the case comes from Dr. Hargrove's sister, Josephine Reed, who broke her silence in a 1965 interview with a small paranormal research publication. When asked if she believed her brother was dead, she responded, "Vincent isn't dead. Sometimes I hear him speaking through the walls of my home. He's trying to warn us about what he found, or what found him. He keeps saying the same thing. The angles are wrong, and something knows we're here." Reed further claimed that since her brother's disappearance, she had experienced strange phenomena in her own home. Cold spots that moved from room to room, whispers that seemed to emerge from empty air, and, most disturbing, perfect circular impressions that appeared on her walls overnight. "They're like fingerprints," she explained, "but not human ones. Too perfect, too precise." Reed died in 1972 of natural causes, but the attending physician noted in his report that her home contained dozens of tuning forks hanging from the ceiling. An unusual decoration that her neighbors claimed was her attempt to keep the whispers away. The Hargrove cabin remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the Ozark Mountains, a case where the line between psychological breakdown and genuine supernatural encounter remains impossibly blurred. Those familiar with the details often point to Hargrove's final journal entry as the most unsettling element of all. The last words, written in a hand so shaky as to be nearly illegible, read simply, "It has a face now." In 1958, a survey team from the Missouri Department of Conservation was mapping trails near the former cabin site when they reported an unusual acoustic phenomenon. According to their field notes, a whistle or shout at certain points in the valley would produce an echo that returned noticeably altered, deeper in tone, and seemingly longer in duration than the original sound. Equipment set up to record these anomalies malfunctioned consistently, with recording devices either failing to capture any audio or recording only static and unidentifiable low-frequency rumbling. The team's lead surveyor noted in his report that several team members experienced intense discomfort while in the valley, describing sensations of being watched and a pressure on the ears similar to rapid altitude changes. The survey was abandoned after 3 days when 2 team members developed severe disorientation and nosebleeds that cleared up only after leaving the area. Meteorological reports from the region show another strange pattern. Since the 1950s, weather stations have documented an unusual cold spot centered on the valley where the cabin stood. Average temperatures in this specific area are consistently 3 to 5 degrees cooler than surrounding terrain with similar elevation and exposure. More puzzling are the electrical anomalies. Compass needles behave erratically within the cold spot, and electronic equipment frequently malfunctions. A 1983 study by the University of Missouri noted heightened electromagnetic readings in the area, but could offer no geological explanation for them. Forest Service records indicate that in the decades following the demolition of the cabin, an unusual number of hikers reported becoming inexplicably lost in that section of forest, even experienced outdoorsmen with proper equipment. Several described walking for hours only to find themselves returning to the same clearing repeatedly, despite attempting to maintain a straight course. Others reported that compasses behaved erratically, with the needle spinning continuously or pointing in impossible directions. In 1977, a research paper published in an obscure archaeological journal theorized that the valley might have been the site of a previously unknown indigenous ceremonial ground. The author, Dr. Eleanor Hayes of Washington University, cited unusual rock formations and the persistent local taboos surrounding the area. Her paper noted that similar geographical locations throughout the world often featured in folklore as thin places or portals. What makes her work particularly interesting is that she had no knowledge of the Hargrove case when conducting her research, yet her descriptions of the valley's unusual properties, including acoustic anomalies and unexplained cold spots, align remarkably well with the details in Hargrove's journal. Interestingly, her academic career appears to have ended shortly after this publication, and she withdrew from public life entirely. A 1981 Internal Forest Service memo, released under the Freedom of Information Act in 2015, reveals that the agency maintained regular monitoring of the site from 1968 until at least 1980. The document references continued anomalous readings and persistent unexplained phenomena, but provides no specific details. Most intriguing is a redacted section that appears to discuss containment procedures and acoustic dampening installations around the perimeter of the valley. The purpose of these installations is not explained, nor is there any record of their construction in Public Forest Service documents. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2004, when a pair of amateur paranormal investigators attempted to camp near the presumed cabin site. They were found 3 days later by a search party, both suffering from extreme dehydration despite carrying adequate water supplies. The men had no recollection of the time they had spent in the forest, but their digital recorder contained hours of what a sound analyst later described as mechanical humming interspersed with what might be human speech played in reverse. The men's cameras contained no images, despite both insisting they had taken dozens of photographs. Medical examination of the men revealed another disturbing detail. Both had developed identical circular lesions on their inner wrists, approximately 1 centimeter in diameter. These marks, which resembled perfect burns, faded over the course of several weeks but left permanent scarring. Neither man had any medical explanation for these markings, and both reported recurring nightmares involving a face in stone for months afterward. What remains particularly striking about the Hargrove case is how it prefigures modern concepts in theoretical physics. His descriptions of spatial distortion and impossible angles align with concepts of non-Euclidean geometry that wouldn't become part of mainstream scientific discussion until decades later. Some researchers have suggested that the limestone cave system might create natural electromagnetic anomalies that could affect human perception and possibly even the experience of space-time itself. Others point to the region's unusual geological features. The Ozarks contain some of the oldest exposed rock formations in North America, dating back over 4 billion years. The particular valley where the cabin stood sits atop an unusual convergence of limestone, dolomite, and what geologists have identified as an anomalous igneous intrusion that doesn't match other volcanic formations in the region. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 1992 revealed what appears to be a perfectly spherical cavity approximately 40 feet beneath where the cabin once stood, a formation that geologists struggle to explain through natural processes. The Ozark Mountains have long been home to tales of strange phenomena. Early European settlers recorded stories of ghost lights, unexplained sounds, and areas where animals refused to enter. Indigenous oral traditions speak of certain valleys as being doorways, or places where the other world presses close. The particular valley where Hargrove's cabin stood appears in Cherokee stories as a location where the shadow people could cross over. What makes the Hargrove case stand apart from mere folklore is the clinical, scientific approach of the doctor himself. His journal begins as the detailed observations of a rational man, someone trained to observe and document with precision. The gradual transformation of his entries from skeptical documentation to terrified acceptance suggests something beyond simple psychological breakdown. Former Forest Service Ranger Samuel Willis, who participated in the 1968 demolition of the cabin, broke his silence in a 2001 interview with a small local newspaper. Willis described the unusual difficulty workers encountered when attempting to dismantle the structure. The stone wouldn't break right, he recalled. Hit it with a sledgehammer, and it would just absorb the impact, barely a chip coming off. And the sound it made, not like stone should sound. More like hitting something hollow, but with a delay, like the sound was coming from somewhere else entirely. Willis also described the demolition team's discovery of unusual markings on the interior limestone wall. Not carvings exactly, more like the stone had been melted in places to form patterns. Swirling shapes that seemed to draw your eye in and hold it, made you dizzy, looking at them too long. One of the men, Darrell Winters, stared at that pattern for too long and started speaking gibberish. He snapped out of it after a few minutes, but said he'd seen something moving within the stone itself, something with too many angles. According to Willis, the team ultimately resorted to explosives to demolish the structure, after which the remaining rubble was buried and the cave entrance sealed with concrete. Even then, Willis noted, there was something not right about how that explosion behaved. The sound was wrong, too muffled, and it seemed to go on too long. And after, when the dust cleared, there was less debris than there should have been, like some of it had just gone somewhere else. Willis revealed another detail omitted from official reports, that during excavation of the foundation, workers discovered what appeared to be a stone well beneath the cabin floor, descending straight down into darkness. "We dropped a flare down that shaft," he recalled, "and never heard it hit bottom. The light just kept going until it vanished. No one wanted to measure how deep it went. We just poured concrete down it for half a day until it seemed full, then collapsed the cabin on top of it all." In the years following the demolition, Willis claimed to have suffered from persistent nightmares, featuring what he described as a face made of stone that spoke without moving its lips. He reported waking regularly to find perfect circular indentations in his bedroom walls that would be gone by morning. Most disturbing was his claim that he would sometimes hear violin music playing faintly from empty rooms in his home, particularly during thunderstorms. Perhaps the most logical explanation for the Hargrove case involves the psychological effects of isolation combined with unusual environmental factors. The specific acoustic properties of the cave cabin hybrid could have created infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing that have been documented to cause feelings of unease, disorientation, and even visual hallucinations in sensitive individuals. The region's unusual geology might also produce electromagnetic fields that could affect brain function. Studies have shown that certain patterns of electromagnetic radiation can induce altered states of consciousness, including the sensation of being watched or the perception of presences that aren't there. The limestone formations in the Ozarks are known to contain high concentrations of various minerals that could theoretically create such fields naturally. Yet this explanation fails to account for the consistent reports of unusual phenomena by different individuals over decades, or the physical evidence that occasionally surfaces, like the strange limestone fragment uncovered in 1995, or the medical bag with its inexplicable contents. Some researchers have proposed that the site represents what physicist Werner Hubesch termed a space-time anomaly, a location where the fabric of reality itself is distorted in subtle ways. In a 2012 paper published in the Journal of Theoretical Physics, Hubesch suggested that certain geological formations might act as natural amplifiers for quantum effects that normally only manifest at the subatomic level, creating macroscopic distortions in space-time. If such a place exists, Hubesch wrote, we would expect to observe precisely the kinds of phenomena reported in the Hargrove case: acoustic anomalies, seemingly impossible geometry, and the sensation of presence or observation. These would be the perceptible manifestations of higher dimensional space intersecting with our conventional three-dimensional reality. Today, the precise location of Hargrove's cabin has been deliberately obscured on official maps. Forest Service personnel routinely redirect hikers who inquire about the site, citing safety concerns related to unstable cave systems. Yet local guides still refuse to take groups to that particular valley, and longtime residents of Van Buren still speak in hushed tones about the wrong place in the woods. The case files remain partially sealed in state archives, with certain documents classified under national security provisions that seem excessive for what was officially deemed a missing persons case. Attempts by journalists and researchers to access these files through Freedom of Information Act requests have been consistently denied, raising questions about what information the government might be protecting. In recent years, another curious pattern has emerged. Geological surveys of the region conducted in 2014 revealed an unusual increase in seismic activity centered precisely on the valley where the cabin once stood. These micro-earthquakes, too small to be felt but clearly visible on sensitive equipment, occur in regular intervals approximately every 38 days. More puzzling is their consistent duration of 11 minutes and 17 seconds, matching exactly the time shown on Hargrove's pocket watch when it was recovered from the riverbed. In the end, what happened to Dr. Vincent Hargrove remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the Ozark Mountains. His final journal entry, with its reference to something gaining a face, continues to haunt those familiar with the case. The possibility that something within that cabin, something accessed through impossible geometry and strange acoustics, might have found a way into our world through the doctor's actions, remains the most terrifying aspect of all. As Detective Thorne wrote in his personal notes, never intended for public view. I've investigated murders, seen the worst that humans can do to one another. Nothing has disturbed my sleep like standing in that cabin. There was nothing overtly threatening, no blood, no signs of violence, just a pervasive wrongness that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I couldn't shake the feeling that the space I was standing in wasn't entirely here, as if part of it extended somewhere else, somewhere we aren't meant to go, and worse, that something from that elsewhere was looking back through. The forest has reclaimed that valley now. Hikers who stray near the area report an unusual silence, an absence of the normal forest sounds that should fill the Ozark wilderness. Some describe a sensation of pressure, as if descending deep underwater, and a persistent feeling of being observed from all directions at once. In 2019, a trail camera placed by wildlife researchers approximately 1 mile from the presumed cabin site captured a strange image that has yet to be explained. The infrared photograph taken at 11:17 p.m. shows what appears to be a human figure standing motionless among the trees. What makes the image disturbing is not the figure itself, but what surrounds it. The trees in its immediate vicinity appear distorted, as if viewed through warped glass. More unsettling still is that the figure casts no shadow despite the camera's flash, and seems to be wearing what resembles a doctor's white coat, now uncommon in these woods. Perhaps there are some mysteries that should remain unsolved. Some doors, once opened, may never truly close again. And in the ancient limestone hills of the Ozarks, where the boundary between worlds may grow thin, something might still be waiting, listening through the stone for another human voice to answer its call. As Hargrove wrote in his final letter to his sister, never delivered, what I've learned in this place is that reality is far more fragile than we imagine. The walls between worlds are thin here, worn down by forces we cannot comprehend. And there are things on the other side that have been watching us for a very long time, patient beyond human understanding. They have learned our language, Josephine. They have learned our shapes, and now they want to come through.